So today is the last day of term at the House of Lords, or rather recess starts tomorrow. So we've actually finished this year's parliamentary year off for the summer. And so I thought I'd do a bit of end of term reflections on what it's been like. And I think it's worth starting with the role of the Lords, because there's actually been a lot of controversy in the last week, in fact, about the new Lords coming in. So much controversy that the police are sirening behind me. But anyway, now there's been, as you will have seen in newspapers, a lot of a fuss about Boris Johnson's latest list, new Lords coming in, how awful it is. And there's no doubt about it that the appointment system for the House of Lords leaves a lot to be desired. And a lot of people would use me as an illustration of how on earth did I get in? And it's a fair question. But there's something really irritating that happened this week, which is that the members of the House of Lords who are presently there decided to use a question by Baroness Jones of Bulscombe, that is Jenny Jones from the Green Party, to anyone else, who basically said, is the appointment system corrupt and ruining the House of Lords? And then they all stood up in a very pompous way, implying that anyone who was new was sort of somehow part of this corrupt, friends of a Prime Minister, who gave them the right, and shouldn't the House of Lords be forward for experts, people who know what they're talking about, people who are serious about politics. And there was something so unpleasant about the way that they were congratulating themselves and saying that anyone new comes in as part of the kind of disreputable side, but that they are all, of course, worthy of moral authority, and they are fit to be legislators, but nobody else is. I just thought it was far too pompous. I didn't like it at all. And also they did it in front of people who were new. So there's one thing to say is that actually Jenny Jones retrieved a bit of my regard for her today, because she actually tweeted about Charlotte, the youngest member of the House of Lords, who's actually been the victim of a huge amount of innuendo about, she's a blonde bimbo that Boris has brought in, all this sort of stuff, Very unpleasant. I don't know the woman, never met her, shook her hand yesterday, don't know her. And Jenny Jones said maybe we should give her a chance, because if she comes in and says anything interesting, works hard, then actually fair enough. And I was glad that she'd actually had that thought, having been the one who'd started this rather unsavoury debate the day before. The other thing is, for the first time ever, I was a sponsor. That means that you walk in with a new member of the House of Lords, and that was when Sean Bailey was brought in. Lord Bailey now, of Paddington. And Sean Bailey stood as the candidate for the Conservative Party as a mayor. He can get elected, he's on the GLA. And the reason why he asked me, which I was very pleased to be asked by him, very honoured to be asked, was because I've known him a very long time before he was involved in politics. When he was a youth worker working with inner city kids who had drug problems, who were people that he was dedicated to. And I don't care that he's become a Conservative. I don't care whether I don't agree with him. He's actually been very supportive of the Academy of Ideas. He's been a judge for Debating Matters. He's always shown a lot of interest in young people. He's always been a defender of free speech. And he's always refused to play the race card, but never denied that there's racism. He's always been very sensible in the discussions on critical race theory and so on, saying that's not the kind of anti-racism he's associated with. So I think, give him credit. And so I had the ermine on for the first time since I came into the Lords, but also the first time in public, because when I came in it was lockdown. So I was glad to be a sponsor. I was so nervous that I'd bow at the wrong time, can't begin to tell you. And of course I did. But anyway, I got away with it. And I'm glad that he's in the House of Lords, because he's a good bloke. And he came in with Ben Gascoigne, who was another of Boris's, number 10 crowd, who's also somebody that I've been interested in his politics for a while. And so, you can kind of whinge and moan and say, what are they doing in the House of Lords, but what are any of us doing there? So that's just that reflection. Another thing I wanted to reflect on in terms of what's happened in the House of Lords the last couple of weeks is the last time I did an Inside the Lords, I talked about the illegal migration bill and how the Lords were attempting to block it. And there was a huge amount of fury and furore, and how the Lords are going to have to sit until 2 in the morning to stop and block the government's bill, and in fact we were there till 2 in the morning on part of ping pong, where the Lords would not back down on their amendments, and this is completely unconstitutional, by the way, because it had already been back to the Commons had sent it back, we'd sent it back, and then it was back again, and then at that point the Lords should give way, but they wouldn't. But what was really interesting was, despite a heightened sense of, again, self-congratulations, we're the morally righteous ones blocking the illegal migration bill, despite the fact that there are real problems in the way that refugee status is being abused, being played, actually more by human rights lawyers than ordinary people themselves, despite the problems of the small boats, which everybody in the Lords refused to acknowledge and insist on saying that everybody in a small boat was really escaping war and famine and discrediting the whole notion of asylum, in my view. Despite all that and the fact that they were determined to beat the Tories, they lost all the votes. I mean, all of them. It was extraordinary. And the reason I think that happened was that quite a lot of crossbenchers decided that actually constitutionally it had come to an end, kind of abstained. I voted either with the government or abstained, where I felt the government were completely wrong, but I didn't think it was right to oppose them. The Labour Party and the Lib Dems jointly supported all of their amendments, opposed the government on everything. But the Conservative Party did something that they don't usually do, which was a proper three-line whip, which was every single Tory that could move, and there was an awful lot of wheelchairs and a lot of walking sticks in on that night, even till 2 in the morning. They got all the old Tory men and women out from the Lords, and they voted with the government, and so ultimately the government won. The work that you know that I've been doing, and all the speeches below on my final tranche of speeches now, my main preoccupation over the last 2-3 months has been the online safety bill, and we just finished report stage, and I'm afraid things didn't improve, didn't get anywhere with forcing the government to make any concessions at all. But two things to say. I have, as you know, along with Daniel Moylan, Lord Moylan, been making the free speech arguments against the online safety bill. And I think that the week before last, I really made a kind of impassion. I can't stand the fact that free speech is being treated as something trivial, kind of eccentricity. And this week, or last week as it was, in those final days, for the first time, everybody else, Labour, Lib Dem, Crossbench, anyone who was in, actually started saying, we do know that free speech is important. Now, it didn't change the bill, but we changed the mood. And at least there was a defensiveness about the assaults on free speech. And I thought that was, I mean, I'm looking for small mercies, a little bit of hope. But actually, I did think, yeah, they now are on the defensive with us, right? They now have to say there's a danger here to free speech, even though they weren't going to oppose the bill. One of the things that did happen was that the government, I think, have made a real error of judgment on encryption. They just will not budge on the fact that they are putting a duty onto Ofcom to force the likes of WhatsApp or Signal or any of the private messaging services to have to use technology to scan for child sexual abuse images or terrorism, which sounds, of course, that sounds good, except that scanning, that technological intervention breaks encryption, which basically means mass surveillance on our private messaging. And it is always the case that you have to consider, for example, that if you wanted to say that you wanted to stop every example of child abuse in this country by surveillance, that you could film everyone in their own home, because that's where most child abuse occurs. So, all right, why don't the government put a film camera in every living room? I'm frightened to say this in case they decide it's a good idea, by the way. Why don't they listen in to every single phone conversation? Why don't they read all of our emails? Why don't they spy on us every single minute of every single day in case we are the would-be abuser, would-be villain, criminal, what have you? But they don't do that because in a free society, you don't do that. So breaking encryption by having mass surveillance of all our messages in case somebody is using private messaging for ill is a very dangerous step, and the government will not accept it. In fact, the minister insisted that encryption wouldn't be broken, that in fact there was a technological way of not breaking encryption. This is despite the fact that thousands and thousands of scientists and technologists from all over the world have said that this bill will break encryption, that it demands encryption is broken. And what it dawned on me when the minister was reading out his pat responses and actually almost gaslighting us, saying that won't happen, don't worry, we haven't forgotten privacy as a right, was that he was just basically reading his notes. And one of the things that I have learned from the Lords is that the ministers are advised by a group of officials who give them their speeches to read out. And when you challenge them, they don't actually know what to say. They're not thinking it through, they're simply delivering a message. And in that sense, there's a real problem of our political class, that they're so incurious that they don't go back to their officials and say, well, Baroness Fox and thousands of scientists and technologists say that this might be a problem. What do you reckon? They simply repeat ad nauseum, as though that makes it true, the line coming from, not even from the government, but from the officials who are advising the government. That seems to me to be very dangerous. A similar thing happened on the online safety bill, which was that they brought in, as was predictable, particular added protection or duties on Ofcom to protect women and girls from misogyny and hate. And that sounds reasonable, doesn't it? I'm a woman, I don't like misogyny, don't particularly like having hate speech thrown at me. Sexism is not something I'm a great fan of, guess what? But the difficulty was that when I challenged them as to who would define misogyny, when I challenged them, for example, about the fact that a lot of misogyny is aimed at gender critical women by trans activists, that it wasn't simple that you just simply said we will fight against women and girls being subject to hate. When I challenged them by quoting the person who stood up at a rally in London and said, you know, if you see a TERF, you know, effing punch them, right? And that would that count, or a film of that, or was it the people who were retweeting the film outraged at this threat to women who were actually having their content removed offline? I mean, you couldn't make it up, being told that they were the hateful ones rather than the actual incitement to go and punch an effing TERF. The minister just garbled a load of equality, diversity and inclusion, gender ideology that he'd been given by somebody. He didn't know what to say. There was no thought put into his answer. So I actually sent a letter, I've never done this before, to the minister, asking him to clarify his comments, pointing out why I'd raised them. That, you know, you can't just say we're opposed to violence against women and girls and then not have any answers when the main argument around women at the moment, one of the key arguments, is how you defend sex versus gender ideology, and then just kind of burble an answer. And I've just had my official reply. I had to chase up for it. It's unsatisfactory, straight out of the, you know, sitting in the middle of the aisle kind of response, a lot of a waffle and so on. But I'm going to pursue it, and I think that what I've learnt is that you can't let ministers just give you these trite answers without pushing them. That reminds me of the other big thing that's been going on, which has been the issue of debanking. And the reason I raised that is because the debanking scandal surrounding Nigel Farage has much greater implications for all of us, as we know. Now, I've already talked about this, so I won't repeat it, but if you remember, I raised an amendment on the Financial Services Bill on the very problem of the potential of debanking, and the minister fudged, you know, load of verbiage, no answer. And now it's been proven that my worst instincts have come true. One of the things that is very important is that the reason why the banks have got away with this is because people have said, well, it's up to banks to decide what their terms and conditions are. And if their terms and conditions contain a load of values, which are politicised, contentious values, which have never been discussed in society at all, not democratically agreed on, but yet in order to be a citizen you need a bank account, but you could be debanked if you breach their values. That relates to the online safety bill, which is actually Ofcom, the most powerful regulator in the country, will be forcing big tech to enforce their terms and conditions when they decide what is harmful and what to remove of our thoughts online, so we won't be able to read or write anything that we want. And those terms and conditions will have been written in Silicon Valley, right? They won't have anything to do with the democracy that we live in. So there's a relationship between those things, and I'm really pleased. I'm not the greatest fan of Nigel Farage and everything, but I'm actually pleased that it's somebody like him that has been debanked, that has got the celebrity value, I suppose, and the political punch to be able to cut through and now make the government panic, say they're going to look at it. And I hope that it won't take something like that, but I think it will take something like that for them to realise that they've wrongly charged Ofcom with exactly the same as what's happening with the banks, which is to force the values of big corporates to define what's acceptable speech in this country. Right, to finish off in the Lords, I've been half and half following the Levelling Up Bill, which we will start back on September the 4th after recess, and I'm hoping that I'll be able to speak particularly on housing and on some over-regulatory of public space, like those who are trying to ban smoking outside, but generally those who use regulation to stop homes being built and so on. There's been so many environmental restrictions brought in under that Levelling Up Bill, which I thought was about making sure that people in the north of England were, had equal access to services, infrastructure, jobs, employment and so on as people in the south. That's where it started, but it's become the vehicle for every crackpot green environmentalist biodiversity scheme going, as a whole series of amendments which have just got through, and the governments have more or less accepted a lot of them. So I will be going on, as I do, on housing and the need to build more homes. So it's been interesting hearing Michael Gove this week launching his housing strategy. And actually Michael Gove, you can be accused of nothing else, is able to listen to public opinion. It's been interesting that he's softened slightly on net zero and biodiversity and environmentalism as the excuses for not building homes, and he's actually said we have to be careful about that. He's noted that a lot of the net zero targets are going to lead to people's cost of living going up through the roof because they're going to have to conform, whether it's the ULEZ charges or whether it's heat pump boilers being enforced on people when they don't need them, when they're more expensive, when they give you less heat, and also the way that that has been used to block up planning of homes and so on. So I thought it was interesting that he's come out with that. I'm not totally satisfied with his housing plan, but at least it feels as though he's been listening. And I'm particularly pleased that he's made it clear that leasehold is a problem, that actually in all of this home buying democracy stuff, most new buyers buy leasehold flats. That's what you have to buy because that's all that you can afford, either ex-local authority or even private. And densified city dwelling requires that you buy a leasehold flat. And that means you don't own the flat at all. And I have been banging on about this, and in fact a few people in the Lords have been banging on about it. And for the first time I can say that the Lords did something good, because we put leasehold, or the problems of leasehold, on the table. We put it on the political map. And Michael Gove listened, and it's a credit to people like the leaseholder grassroots campaign, like Commonhold Now, Harry Scoffin and friends, who really made a fuss of saying the government can't ignore us. Some of us in the Lords therefore made a fuss. Michael Gove is now echoing what we said. Isn't that good? So I feel as though I might have achieved a tiny little bit of good in my time in the Lords this year. So I'm now having my summer break, but I won't be stopping politics. In fact, the real politics starts here in my view. So this weekend I'm at the Academy. If you haven't got a ticket for the Academy, it's organised by the Ideas Matters charity. It's a weekend away. We actually go and stay in a nice place for a weekend, put your phones away. The theme is thinking about the future, why the future has become discredited, why we're stuck in the present. And why we're stuck in the present because we basically demonise the past. Everything from history and tradition is treated as though it's problematic. We have lost our imagination in terms of what kind of future society we want. So we get trapped into presentism, which means that we can't think clearly. So I'm really looking forward to this weekend indeed, where we'll go away. There's lectures on all aspects of what the future might hold, historically, philosophically, how people have viewed the future and how we might move about planning for a better future for ourselves and our families. So if you can grab a ticket, there's a few left. Either come for a day, come for the weekend, and I hope I'll see you there because it really is brilliant. And it's almost like a hotel setting, so you get a chance to have time to eat with people, talk with people, you know, drink with people. There's a lot of social time as well as these brilliant lectures and discussions as well. And I'll spend the summer now finalising the programme for the Battle of Ideas Festival, which is October the 28th and 29th, which seems a long way away, but it's actually really just around the corner. And we have a lot of speakers agreed, but we haven't finalised the programme yet. So that will be my full-time. I don't have a summer off. I'm not going to the south of France. Everyone in the Lords is saying, where are you going for the summer? Well, where I'm going is to my computer to finish sorting out the Battle of Ideas Festival. But I love it because that's what I think is important. That's when we'll get a chance to warm meet again. The early bird tickets are on sale. See the details below. See you at the Battle of Ideas. I will be politically active during the summer, but the Lords won't be. So this is my last Inside the Lords till September. Have a good one.